Danny, would you like to kind of talk about a little bit of what you're seeing in the hospitality industry and
Yeah.
in a lot of these restaurants and the correlation with, our current state with the Delta variant and COVID as a whole?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. Trying to figure out where to really begin with this. I was talking to Portillo's yesterday, a fast casual in Chicago, and one thing that they mentioned to me is that labor was an incredibly tight market before COVID, and something that we talked about all the time. But it's almost felt like that we forget that that was the situation, just based on the reality that the COVID era has felt like 5 years and 19 months, and we're kind of stuck in this current cycle that we're in. But the truth is, restaurants were having trouble staffing up well before this shortage became an issue, before there were some, 5.5 million jobs shed in, the first 6 weeks of the pandemic. So, you're really talking about, why is this such a crisis? Why at this point are we walking by, restaurants and there's signs on the doors that say they can't open dining rooms, even though, restrictions have lifted because they can't staff up. And so you're talking about a lot of different angles happening here that are very tough to stay ahead of. And, in a lot of ways, the industry is a million jobs short still, even though there's been this recovery in terms of traffic, and, well, less so in traffic, just in terms of sales and the fact that people are willing to pay more and prices are going up, yet, you're still a million jobs short.
Yeah.
And, I think there's a lot of evidence out there to suggest that restaurants may never get those million jobs back. So we may be talking at different staffing levels moving forward. And what that means for the industry is truly, might be the lasting impact of all this, whether that's cross-training, finding ways to operate with fewer employees, or whether it's paying them more or having different incentives, or the way that you recruit, automation, in some quick service settings, or even some full service settings in terms of, pay at the table, or some of the QR code things that you're seeing. A lot of these, ways to navigate what is happening in terms of labor, are really going to be the biggest story. And it's also happening behind the curtain on the back end in terms of the supply chain, and a lot of things that are less present to the customer. The fact that we have this really unique dynamic of there being issues getting supply, and there being driver shortages, and a lot of it, unlike in the past, is not actually really tied to whether or not there's product. It's more tied to whether or not there's labor. And now how that fixes itself and when it takes shape is actually very cloudy, and I haven't found someone who knows the answer to that just yet. But
So I guess you're saying not only are the restaurants you've been talking with, or the organizations, experiencing the labor shortage on their own, but also within their supply chain, they're having difficulties across the board. Just,
yeah.
Vendors that they are trying to utilize cannot fully service them.
Yeah, and in more recent weeks, to be honest, that's been probably almost a bigger topic that I've heard. Instead of the hourly employee, it's the fact that getting supply has become so difficult, and that is a labor problem more than it's a product one, as I said. And that's a little bit scary, and I think technology is going to play a role in all that too, but that has been really a very pressing, issue lately. So kind of the slide that we're looking at here, it's just another layer and wrinkle, to toss in there, because, I saw a black box intelligence report recently. The number was in the, over 60% of restaurant employees who are reported being harassed by, people coming to dine out right now, whether it's about trying to enforce some kind of vaccine mandate, in some markets, or, even masks, as we have been dealing with for a long, long time. And
Right.
there was a story out of NBC last week where, a server actually got assaulted by, a few people from I think it was maybe from Texas, coming to New York, who didn't want to abide by, whatever the mandate was. So now you have this fear factor, or this anxiety factor, that's tossed into a server's lap, that they're obviously not equipped to handle these type of things. So now you're throwing that into their process too now.
Sure.
Whether people want to come work in a restaurant. So,
Yeah.
it's just another
They signed
thing.
up to be a serving staff. They didn't sign up to be a police force, right?
Right. Yeah, I remember sometime last year, there was the National Restaurant Association had come out with this de-escalation training for restaurants. And, at the time somebody had said to me, were we really going to implement this for our workers? Because whoever thought you'd be paying someone, whatever it is per hour, and they had to take de-escalation training to deal with, crazy people coming to dine. But it's an inescapable reality of this, and I've heard some restaurants mention things like having vaccine bouncers, and that's now a role on the staff, and
I've heard that too.
it's crazy. But, you see it here because, and this was a poll from, a few weeks ago, just talking a little bit about the Delta variant. And the good news of that is that, the restaurant sales last month compared to the previous month were pretty flat. So the recovery is plateauing a bit, which is, all things considered, not really bad news. You had to kind of understand that it was going to be a little bit of a pullback. OpenTable has had a lot of, data recently about reservations falling off in some markets. And, again, it's something that's going to challenge the recruiting process, because you're dealing with a lot of different consumer changes that are happening really rapidly. And, that confidence that's mentioned here, and it is a bit of a delicate situation. And that goes from, the sales side of things
Right.
to what you're having hourly or asking hourly employees to do. So, I can see what
Interesting.
you have here.
Jamie, before we move on, Jamie actually had a really great question in the chat. She asked, do you think scheduling staff against predicted sales has made a significant impact on reducing overall costs and making sure that you have the right amount of staff?
Yeah, that's come up a lot in quick service too. We just did a drive-through study, and one of the things that Taco Bell talked about a lot was this fact of using scheduling software to make sure that they had people at peak hours and trying to basically not overstaff those shoulder periods.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've heard from the ground level a lot is that it's becoming kind of confusing what are peak hours anymore. And this is more a quick service point, because, and also, although, Darden this morning actually talked about Sunday as being a restaurant dining out occasion that's returned, compared to 2019, which is just an interesting to watch on the fine dining side with celebratory occasions. But the point being, like a Dunkin' or a Starbucks, this idea of what is the morning rush has changed. People are coming for really strange snacking hours in the middle of the day, or they're coming to avoid other customers.
Yep.
And so it's very complicated for restaurants, as always in this industry, to try to schedule staff around this. But I do think, to the point of using, technology to help that, especially in the mobile form of just being able to schedule shifts or move around, things, and take some of that, duty off of a manager's plate to scramble to, cover shifts that people just aren't showing up for, is a really big deal. Because, there have been a few studies recently where consumers are starting to notice, understaffed restaurants when they dine out, and you, of course, that's a natural part of this, but you want to do everything you can to avoid that, and trying to staff those peak hours is probably the smartest way to do it.
Yeah.
If you can. But yeah, the point here in this slide of 33% of hourly workers hesitant to return, that is, goes back to what we're talking about, in terms of some of the fears, and that includes both fears of, personal safety of contracting the virus themselves, in addition to, dealing with people who are not really open to what they're being asked to do. And also at the same time, that probably also includes just, one of the biggest topics of leading up to all of this was, why are people not coming back to work? And, every restaurant that you spoke to, they would point to expanded unemployment benefits, and those have rolled off and nothing has really changed. And so I read a couple things that said, okay, well, those maybe weren't as big of a deal as we thought. This fact that, or this idea that people were earning more on the sidelines than they were in a restaurant. And I actually think that's not really the right way to look at it, because in my view, even when they were not working and earning more, and they could come back now that they're not earning on expanded, benefits, the truth is that period of time was almost a great reset in the workforce in a lot of ways. One Fair Wage had a study where they, talked about what do people want now, and this idea of a livable wage has become a lot more prevalent to people because what they thought they could earn or what their job was worth really changed during that long stretch of COVID. And especially now that, restaurants and other sectors are raising pay and benefits. So there's just a much different mindset in terms of what it takes or what you can get from actually working. So I think that's one of the reasons the rush hasn't, come back, isn't just the fact that the government, aid has lifted off. It's during, that period of time, it just changed what the hourly workers saw as being an acceptable entry into the workforce. And I don't know if that changes over the next few months. Kind of hard to say, but I do think that, there was such a big topic before COVID about this race to, 15 as a minimum wage and what that was going to do to the industry. And it almost feels like an afterthought in a lot of ways now because, here we are and you've got, McDonald's paying $18 an hour in some markets and giving away iPhones and doing all these sort of crazy things. And,
Yeah.
Portillo's yesterday when I was talking to them, they put in this, basically if you work during a holiday now, you get $3 more per hour. Their GMs make over $100,000 now. Same is true at Whataburger. So you've had this kind of movement now, and Chipotle raised, up to an average of $15, and McDonald's at the corporate, store level. So really basically my feeling is that someone looking for work, in addition to all the remote opportunities and all that kind of gig economy stuff and different sectors that they might have explored, or even looking more, esoteric to whether or not people think they can make money as a video game streamer, all this stuff that they tried during the period of, receiving unemployment, or at least having that opportunity, has just kind of shaken up what we thought it meant to just go to work.
Sure.
And I don't know that that's going to change, So this Biden administration thing too is a big deal. Maybe less so for restaurants than some other sectors because it hasn't been quite defined really, what does it mean in terms of, 100 employees? Is that a broad thing or is it a store by store thing? So we'll find out on that one. And also attorney generals are trying to sue over it, and that's a mess that we don't have clarity yet on, but it is definitely going to play a role, of course. Conversation I had with a one store franchisee in New York City a few weeks ago, he said that he was actually gaining a lot of employees from this pool of workers who are trying not to have mandated vaccinations. So basically they came to him saying, my bigger employee wanted this, but I'm more interested in flexibility and I don't want to get the vaccine and I need a job to kind of hold me over. And that's going to change. Obviously, there are going to be some restaurants that require it regardless of it's mandated or not. But there's no question, though, just if you pull that pool of labor out, it's going to make it even more difficult to hire. It's just a numbers game.
For sure.
So not saying that's a political thing. It is not. It is just the reality of the fact that you now have less people to hire.
Right.
Yeah, we have a poll question kind of relating to the idea of incentives and numbers and hiring. Has your guys' business needed to increase minimum wages for your employees as incentive from quitting? Feel free to fill that out. It's interesting. 100% so far of answers have been, it really is coming back to what companies can offer, what employers can offer employees at this point.
Yeah, and it's a very nuanced thing. Wages are always going to be the most important part of it. That's just the reality. But as you see here with Red Robin, sign-on bonuses, referral bonuses, the number one thing outside of money that I've personally heard is flexibility, which is a really good thing for restaurants because they can offer that. I was talking to an analyst once, and he sort of predicted that we would have this world where restaurants would have actually larger rosters of employees, but just people working, shorter shifts. So, if someone came to you and said, I've got childcare issues, I just want to work 2 days a week, these hours, you say, okay. So you might have twice as many employees on staff, but these people are working like 2, 3 days a week and kind of very select hours. So, restaurants, the thing about flexibility too is just, get it up in front in the recruitment process. It's one of the great draws of the part-time workforce in restaurants, the ability to offer people that, and also the career ladder to show them, that you can work in this company. It doesn't have to be kind of a stopgap for you. And if it is, that's fine too. But, childcare issues, schooling, all these things have been major parts of the COVID conversation for the workforce. And one of the reasons people didn't come back. So very important to them to have that ability at a restaurant, and for you to make it clear to them that, if they want that, you can give it to them. So, so yeah, in terms of retaining, I'm just, reading through here. When I was talking again, this is kind of just on my mind since it was yesterday, but, Portillo's said that they had set an internal goal of 80% promotions from within. So any, GMs and above, they wanted 80% of those employees to come from hourly workers who started there. Oftentimes that's a powerful lever.
If that goal is that based off of employee feedback of what the Portillo's employees are looking for, or is this kind of like a creative endeavor that they're taking on their own?
I think it was essentially they're trying to make it clear to people who work there that they could make six figures and be GMs, and that also the GMs could rise to become market leaders and above. They have a program about that. It's one of those stats that everybody talks about. One thing about Portillo's that I thought was kind of exceptionally unique was that each one of their restaurants requires almost 90 employees to staff, which I think in quick service it's in the 20s on average, and I have not quite heard such a large number before.
Right.
So it's a complex thing. I mean, it's one of the reasons why a lot of brands are going to be a little muted in their growth moving forward, even though you have this bevy of real estate available in some markets coming from closures. You're not really going to be able to take advantage of that kind of quick growth patterns because of the fact that you can't really staff these restaurants.
Right. That's a lot of what we try and do in regards to finding that information. The reason why I ask is, it sounds like some people are taking this approach where they're trying to be more flexible, provide 2 days worth of shifts, and like that's good for some employees, and then some employees want to be GMs. I doubt that those two populations are really intertwined, if I had to guess.
Yeah. Plus now you have the holidays coming up. So, I've read a few forecasts about it being a bigger holiday season than in some time, and especially last year, just with people rushing out, and also it coming earlier as everyone's kind of seeing the fact that you order a couch now and it takes 4 months to show up, and
right.
So people are beginning their shopping earlier. And so is that an opportunity for restaurants to, maybe get some of these type of workers? And then, I think it was a Snag a Job study, maybe, I don't recall, but the idea was that there was an opportunity here for the hourly worker to almost vet the company possibly for long-term work. And then on the other side, it was the opportunity for a restaurant to have this part-time seasonal worker they might inspire to come longer. Because one of the interesting things that happened over the summer was that there was this rush of teenage, workers back into the workforce, which had been declining, in recent years. And, why did that happen? Probably because they started to pay more. Also maybe because some people were doing remote, schooling, and then, who knows what the other reasons are, but that was a nice little lift there, for a bit. And then it kind of fell off as the summer rolled over. And so maybe now you get another lift from there being a seasonal rush. We'll see how that plays out. It's a bit uncertain, but hopefully it does, at this point.
Yeah. So I think part of the whole goal too about this retaining hospitality staff, that concept is part of retaining is understanding, why are people leaving? So it's one thing to hire, one thing to add, wage to their jobs, to have referral bonuses, all those different things. But the employees that we currently have, how are we looking at their behavior, their analytics, and trying to determine, are we at risk of high burnout? Are we at risk of social, lack of social capital? Both of those kind of things play into this dynamic, this equation of, are we not developing a responsible plan for retaining these staff? So we got a question: how would you recommend managing high overtime costs when you're understaffed? Is there any way to try and lower them right now? So I guess, let me get that out of the way. The question, I would say, trying to understand when your peak times are, like what Danny was talking about earlier, is a really good way of divvying up shifts to make sure I'm not scheduling someone for 10 hours in a day or trying to schedule someone for 50 in a week. If I can know when I have the least amount of staff necessary, and I know that number fluctuates, and part of that maybe is from the work from home population having more added freedom. But if we can pinpoint that in a better way, then I think we can start to avoid that.
Yeah, Jersey Mike's does this thing where if you're a GM there, again, you're making six figures now, which was not the case before the pandemic. They get Sundays off, and then they work half day Saturdays, and the assistant GM flips that with them or something of that nature, and they're doing that to avoid burnout. But then he kind of they kind of mentioned to me too, but they're working 52 hours a week, so it's the restaurant industry is, as I always tell people, you really have to love it to be in it, because it is
It's a labor of love,
in terms of the hours and what it takes and the margins. And, that's why this is a hospitality business to me and not a food business, as I think people get it confused. But you have to have passion for what you're doing. I think that is true of your staff as well.
Sure, yeah. And part of that too is, up on the screen, passion comes from being part of a team, being part of the conversation, maintaining high morale from that kind of, team environment. So if we can try and focus more in on that social capital, maybe we can avoid some of the burnout feeling and alleviate some of this high turnover.
Yeah, I'm seeing, a lot from the poll question that asked the audience, what social capital does their business provide? A lot of people are, saying great culture is huge, and it's having a moment in time right now where it's kind of reigning supreme. Like, culture is something that doesn't necessarily require monetary value, as long as you can be just a good boss, good to your employees. That's great culture, right? So that's really big right now. We're also seeing 33% are saying constant communication between management and staff, having that social capital with, Monday morning briefing, stuff like that, where it's, you're getting live feedback from your staff is huge right now. It's really important.
Yeah, at FB Society, which is like a multi-concept operator in Texas, used to be called Front Burner. Yeah, they always talk about that they hire culture over resume, so that when they're interviewing people, they're really looking for your personality fit over what you've accomplished before getting there. And they, one of their concepts, Whiskey Cake, they actually will give the employee a plant when they first hire them throughout training, so they take care of this plant. And I've been trying to kind of figure out exactly why they do this, but I guess the concept is they're fostering this idea of you being someone who fits what they're looking for from an attentive and just sort of who you are as a person, I guess, and what commitment you give to the team, so to speak, more so than, okay, you've worked at restaurants for the last 5 years, because we could train you. We'd rather you just be a good fit personality wise than things beyond
It's a
that.
pretty beautiful analogy, really.
Yeah, it's different. I've never heard anyone
Yeah,
else do that
that
before.
is new.
Yeah, and I think too importantly, regarding the new slide is we need to, as we're piloting all these different programs and doing things to try and help retain the staff, we need to make sure we're holding analytics on how we're doing. Part of that is getting the quantitative aspects of our workforce. So identifying different trends, whether that's absenteeism or changes in how people are attending their shifts, if they're leaving early, if there's a decline in punctuality as time goes on, if people are taking leave in short notice, things like that are going to go ahead and stand out as we change our philosophies and go through these different mindsets of how we're engaging our employees. Are we helping this data move in a positive trajectory, or are we seeing negative results? I think we got a couple examples of slides on how that kind of technology plays in. We can see for this person, Paula Rodriguez, this kind of information is good for me as a manager, understanding how is Paula doing? Are we punctual? Are we arriving late? How is this information changing over time? And how are our programs being impacting this? So from a qualitative perspective, I think as we were talking about beforehand, we just need to make sure that we're getting that feedback along the way. We don't really know which direction is best for our staff unless we really ask them. So if our staff is primarily focused on getting management experience, then I think that's the direction we need to start taking. Whereas if our staff is more focused on more flexibility, then we need to start offering different shift opportunities. So like 2-hour shifts or 2 days a week, things like that. So I think if we can better understand our workforce from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective, then we're putting ourselves up in a better situation to, capitalize on the projects that we're trying to do and help retain that hospitality staff.